Hey, welcome to the Seller Finance and Creative Deals podcast. I'm Dan Deppen, and today I'm going to be giving you some updates on things that I've been learning lately. On notes, my learning curve has definitely been pretty steep over the last several months as I've been getting into some new types of deals, and also some key takeaways from the Diversified Mortgage Expo that I just returned from in Nashville. And then I've also got some other events coming up. It's going to be kind of a busy rest of the spring and summer. But first off, you may have noticed a little change to the branding and the name of the podcast. So this had previously been called the Note Investor Podcast. Now it's called Seller Finance and Creative Deals. And the reason for that is it's not so much that the content's changing. Still going to be covering everything around note buying, but now that I own Call the Underwriter and I'm spending a lot more of my time originating seller finance deals and working with a lot of people doing wraps and subject twos and all kinds of other creative stuff. And I've actually had a lot of those people on, some of those people on in the past, just updating the name and the branding to more reflect what we're doing. But if you like this for the note investing content, that's not really going to change. So don't worry about that. One thing I did learn at D or was kind of reinforced when I was in Nashville last week for DME is that like a lot of people came up and told me that they enjoy listening to the podcast and they really like it. So I need to up my podcasting output. I've been trying to do one per week, and if you follow me, you notice like I have these little runs where I'll keep up with that for a couple weeks and then I kind of fall behind. It's just been a little bit challenging with everything else going on, but it's an important thing, and I'm glad that people appreciate it. So I'll try to keep that going. Um, and definitely one of those things that's kept me busy has been the scaling out of Call the Underwriter for underwriting seller finance loans. I've now got what I would call kind of the back end of that business in a pretty good spot. So I've been able to do some hiring. I've got a couple of underwriters helping me with files. Been kind of upping some of the back end automation. And I'm really on the verge of doing some super cool stuff, automating some of the back end of that will really help me speed up that underwriting process and just also make the final product more consistent, overall. So, but it's definitely been a challenge. There's a lot going on there. If you own one business, let alone multiple, even with help, it can definitely keep you busy. And there have been some twists and turns with that. Had a vendor who would help us with some of the docs for Call the Underwriter, and had to basically fire that vendor recently. There were some challenges, and it had created a few customer satisfaction issues. And one of their people at the vendor had a little bit of a tendency to get snippy with my clients, which is not okay. So they had to go. So I'm going to work on backfilling that vendor. One of the things, if you followed me for a while, I did work for AWS for Amazon for a while, and they are known for a pretty relentless customer focus, right? Like I've worked for a lot of different companies, and kind of every company says, "Hey, we really care about our customers." And Amazon's the only company I ever worked for that like actually takes that stuff seriously. And so I'm trying to bring that over to Call the Underwriter and Fusion Notes and my other stuff. Looking at some of the future of the underwriting business, there's a lot of good opportunities and things we'll be working on. Maybe like later in this year or next year. Some interesting lending products available, so that you can basically the seller financier does not necessarily have to hold the loan if they don't want to. There are folks out there, both institutions and individuals, who are interested in table funding these loans, and then that really opens up the aperture on what you can do with the business. Of course, once you get to that point where someone else is funding the loan, it's not technically really seller finance. At that point, it's almost more like non-QM financing available for investors. So stay tuned on that. That's going to be a little ways like out. That's not going to be next week. or anything like that. The other thing that's kind of interesting for my business in this year, so, you know, I went into this year actually with the intention of not so much trying to buy new notes unless it was going to be opportunistic. And I was actually going to pare back my note portfolio a little bit to make sure I had time and space to handle the underwriting business and get that up and going. Kind of the interesting thing that's happened is I'm basically doing the opposite of that. Now that I've got a lot of the day to day underwriting stuff in a pretty good place, there have been some cool opportunities that have come across my desk and investors who are looking for deals. And so I'll probably hear back today, but um, I'll I'll probably make my what's either my largest ever note purchase or second largest note purchase, assuming this whole thing pans out. And I think it just shows like what opportunities there are in the market right now. If you hear people complaining about their inability to find deals, they're either just flat out looking in the wrong place or they're trying to apply some kind of business model that maybe worked 5 years ago when there were assets available from the financial crisis, or they're just really not serious about doing it. So definitely plenty of assets out there. And that was evidenced too at the DME in Nashville. So, getting in a little bit more of a recap on that event. So if you're not familiar with it, there's really only a handful of note buying focused conferences out there. Note Expo is the big one in the fall that usually runs early November. But, the second one is the Diversified Mortgage Expo in Nashville run by Nathan Turner. So this is my second year at the event. It's a really cool event. It's just a nice opportunity to meet, even the people that have been in my network for a long time, face to face and sit down and hang out and really see what's going on in the industry. And unlike last year, I had a little bit of time to tourist around. So my fiance Allison came out with me, and then we got in kind of early Thursday before everything kicked off, and actually got to go downtown. Got to go check out the Kid Rock Bar, which was pretty fun, and see some of that stuff. It was crazy because it was like Thursday afternoon, and that place was the whole area was really busy. I can't imagine what that's like on a weekend evening, something like that. So that was a lot of fun. And then the other thing DME is kind of famous for, they kick it off with an axe throwing event Thursday night. Nathan's, I think it's his brother-in-law, owns that place in Nashville. And so that was a lot of fun. They do a little tournament. I got eliminated quickly in the first round by Gabe Cass. So that didn't go too well. Like he nailed a bullseye like right out the gate, and I did not last long in that. But it was definitely fun. And then I also presented a side session on how to underwrite seller finance loans. And Nathan wanted this a little more interactive, so it wasn't so much a presentation as like some kind of guidelines and then open-ended questions for the audience. So that was a lot of fun. Had a packed house in the side room, which was super cool and got a lot of good questions on underwriting loans. And it was also interesting too to solicit some of the perspectives of people in the audience, right? Because just like any form of real estate investing, no two people are going to do it exactly the same way, and different people have different philosophies and different things they care about, and that different things that they don't. So that was a really good conversation. So some of the high level takeaways, I would say one, there's a lot of high level people there. It's interesting. So, some of the people I've already known for a long time, they've done a lot in notes for many years. But then, there's some other people who are maybe a little newer to notes, but have really cool backgrounds in the mortgage industry and have definitely done some big boy investing. Got to hang out with Mark Monroe a little bit, which I really enjoy, which I always enjoy. If you don't know who he is, he's got a gigantic group on Facebook. I believe it's called Seller Finance Homes, something like that. But I think it's like 150,000 plus, like all people doing different kinds of creative deals, very active group. So definitely check that out if you're not familiar with that one. The other cool thing was there was an institutional buyer there who I've worked with before and I'm planning to do more work with. And they were actually able to share with me some of their model for how they price loans and how they buy loans. So that'll be really nice because then that helps me create notes that they will want to buy. And then actually, I'm selling some of my notes from my existing portfolio to them as well. So the better, it's always great when you can have a better relationship with your counterparties, and if and it's always great when like buyers and sellers of notes can kind of understand what each other is doing, and that allows you to, zero and X a lot faster. Okay, so and then some other takeaways that are a little more uh, not necessarily specific to the conference. These are things that I was maybe thinking about a little bit going into this, and I think it kind of shone through there. So one of the things on my mind has been the difference between note buyers and note creators. So these are two very, while there's overlap, they tend to be two different distinct type of investors, right? So your note buyer, and what's really interesting too is by and large, even though there's some overlap, right? Like as a note buyer for many years, I did create 5 or 6 notes along the way. Like note buyers will occasionally create them, um, but not that often, and generally not as a business model. And the other thing I found interesting working with a lot of note creators is by and large, your note creators are not very familiar with the note buying and selling worlds. And so one of the things I'm trying to do with this podcast is kind of like bring those things together because I do find it very odd that the people who create a product and then the people who buy a product don't tend to know that much about one another or interact that much. So that's something I would like to help fix. So if you look at your typical note buyer persona, and yeah, I mean mileage varies. Like if you've been around the industry for a while, like there's all kinds of different cast of characters, but by and large, your note buyers tend to be very ultra conservative people, right? Which is a little odd when you consider that some of these same people are doing non-performing notes. I've always considered note buying kind of one of your more, especially the non-performing world, like a more risky. It's more of like a higher risk, higher reward activity. But a lot of the people that are active in the industry these days are not like your runner gunners. They tend to be more conservative. The other thing I like to do too is kind of ask people why they do what they do. I do get to talk to a lot of different investors every day, and I like to ask them about their business model and how they do things because it helps me learn and understand, right? And like I said, no two investors seem to do things exactly the same way. But sometimes when you talk to, this isn't the case across the board, but sometimes when you talk to note buyers, and I had some of these conversations at DME, and they'll say, I don't buy this kind of asset. I don't buy whatever contract for deeds, or you ask them about some deal type, and they'll say, I don't do that. I only do this. And if you ask them why, they often don't have an answer for that. Sometimes it's because people have told them that's not a good idea, or it's just not something they've done in the past. I think it's always good, like, as an engineer, to be able to explain why it is you do what you do or why it is you don't do other things. That's like the secret of this podcast is I get more out of this than anyone else because it's really an opportunity for me to kind of flush out um, a lot of my thinking and look for blind spots, right? So I think some note buyers out there definitely have some blind spots and sometimes miss some opportunities, and that sometimes leads to people saying, there's not enough supply, there's no assets for me to go buy. If you're willing to adjust your model here and there in a thoughtful way where it makes sense, look around, there's plenty of notes out there. Now, on the other hand, your note creator persona, again, these folks are all over the map as well, right? So it's a little bit hard to generalize, but I would say, generally speaking, right, like most of your note creators they tend to not come from the note buying crowd. These are people who are maybe home investors, franchisees, right? Like they tend to come from like a wholesaling fix and flip background sometimes. They're doing like wraps and subject to. Do a lot of folks work with a lot of folks in the sub two community, and they tend to be a lot more aggressive, right? And so sometimes that leads them to making mistakes, or sometimes they do things and you're like, whoa, that's kind of risky. Um, the advantage though they have in that model is they'll get more done faster, and assuming they don't blow themselves up at some point, their learning curve is going to be a lot steeper. So the note creator group definitely more dynamic, um, I would say. Although the thing I still find fascinating too is while the note creators aren't as familiar with the note buying world, which is a little odd since once people start creating a lot of notes, they create more. And then, usually the other thing too I've noticed with note creators is they get a model together for acquiring properties and selling them on owner finance. And then once they kind of crack the code in their little area, they just start to scale, right? And then as they scale, they generally need to recapitalize. And so that's where, being able to sell some of those notes or sell partials or do whatever and interact with the note buying world is going to become more important. The other thing I find kind of fascinating too, for as many notes as are being created out there, the vendor network to support that is really rickety. There are, RMLOs are very hard to find for some reason. And I guess I can kind of understand why in a way. But there aren't many RMLOs when you're doing wraps and sub twos, right? Like a lot of your title companies, different folks may not understand how those work. So, one of the challenges with creating notes is finding the right set of vendors. And that's something where I'll have some people on in the coming months to try to help with that as well. So that was DME. Going forward, I got a lot going on. I'm sure I'll have a lot of things to talk about. So this weekend, as I'm recording this, actually, this will probably be done. This might be done by the time that you hear that. But Pace Morby's coming to Denver, and he's doing a 2-day rap boot camp that I'm gonna attend. So I'm super excited about this. So while I understand raps, at a high level, well, maybe a little more than a high level, I've never actually done one myself. And since I have a lot of clients creating rap loans, I've really been on a mission to understand these things like really in depth so that if I see someone doing something, that might be suboptimal, like I can try to steer them in the right direction. Plus, I'm likely selling my primary residence next year. And so I would love to wrap my 2.75% loan as well. And it's an opportunity to meet Pace Morby, which I haven't actually done before. I've got friends who are friends with him. I've heard he's a super cool guy, but looking forward to hanging out with him. And then, like 2 days after that, I'll be going to Phoenix for real estate meetup event for the AZ RIA. So really looking forward to that and getting more involved with that group. And then we'll see how it goes later into the summer. I know that in August I will be in Columbus for the Corey Expo that they're going to do up there. So that's Vina Cox's group. So lots of different stuff going on and lots to report as we move along. I'll be continuing to share what I learned. And then I'm also going to have a series on AI that'll be coming very soon. So stay tuned for that. That's something I've been spending really a lot of time on. And it's cool too, because as I've been working on buying some new notes and putting together this purchase, really for the first time, I've been using AI to help me with that process. So right now it's pretty basic stuff, I'd say, kind of pulling up property information, pulling comps, getting rental rates, and things like that. But these tools are super, super powerful and they're getting better every day. So over the course of the summer, I'll start doing a series of podcasts on those to help people understand better how to incorporate that into your business because it can really save you a boatload of time and make your life easier. So that's all for now. I will see you guys next week. In the meantime, if you got questions or topics or things you want to know about, feel free to drop me an email at dan@calltheunderwriter.com. And I will see you guys next time.